Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 7 of this class. We're getting toward the end. I've really enjoyed uh, reading so far your initial outlines for your final paper. I'm genuinely excited to kind of read everything you've gone through. I'll try and make week 7 and 8 as brief as possible. I know it gets a little crazy toward the end of the term, especially with these accelerated terms. So, as you'll see, the week 8 film review, the assignment, and your typical discussion is due Friday of week 8 instead of Sunday, based on when grades are due. So be sure to check that out. Also, there is no quiz for week 8. And just 2 discussion questions that are kind of bigger, broader themes. So today I want to take you through some of the readings. This article by Maya Zafis, Targeting Precision in the Production of Ethics, I think is a really great article, and I want you to kind of take some time to read through it. And I want you to think about how you would define her core thesis. Right? So this is, I would like to say, a model for how you should write an article. She takes you through, she has a novel idea, she gives you the best argument and the seduction of precision. So, what is the role of precision in warfare? And she takes you through a story that lays out her opponent's arguments very fairly and very well. And then she takes the rest of the paper kind of deconstructing it. So, when you're thinking, how do I write an article length paper? This is the model that we should all strive for. It's a really, really fantastic paper. So, as you're going through this article, think about what her core thesis is, the role of precision in war. How does she kind of undermine the idea of precision, the idea of accidents in war, so civilian casualties? And what is the role of smart bombs? How is that kind of challenging ethics in war? So throughout her paper, she gives us this kind of historical perspective and this kind of very compelling narrative that warfare is becoming more human, more humane, and more ethical. Right? So when you compare drone strikes or smart bombs to, the firebombing of Dresden, of course it's going to appear more ethical. But she says that's a little bit misleading. That's not the nature of warfare. And in addition, laws, norms, etc., have evolved since then. So one of her core arguments is that the idea of smart bombs is somewhat of a linguistic trick, right? It gives you this idea that bombs are more precise than they necessarily are, and she kind of breaks down this idea of precision. But what's kind of key in thinking about this, and a lot of your readings from Army of None, is that the myth of war and the image that we have of war is often divorced from reality, right? So when you hear the word smart bomb, when you hear the word AI, you automatically assume that it is better than human, right? And so she kind of takes you through and deconstructs this idea of what it means to be smart. But what's so compelling about this is, a lot of the linguistic claims that decision makers and policymakers make is appeal to the technology, right? This clean, surgical, legal, and ethical war is somehow possible. It's everything that we've been reading in law, science, and liberalism, that technology and war inherently makes our warfare more ethical. So she talks about the seductivity of this, right? It's a technical fix, an engineering problem to an ethico-political dilemma, right? Killing in war is difficult. It should be difficult. It is a burden to decide to take a life, right? It shouldn't be taken lightly. And so essentially what she's arguing is that we are trying to outsource that ethico-political dilemma, that kind of ethical burden, the political choices that we have to make to this kind of technology. And you saw this a bit in my lecture last week about the Bugspot program. So she talks a lot about the myth versus reality in warfare, and she takes us back to the first Gulf War a little bit. And it's not just direct kinetic effects. If you look at kind of U.S. Both U.S. and civilian casualties in the first Gulf War, we talked were quite low overall. But the second, third order consequences, the U.S. decided to target water purification, especially electrical plants in this war. So this was based off of not wanting to strike Saddam Hussein's biological and chemical weapons depots. And so instead, they wanted to take out the refrigeration units for that. Those depots were very heavily guarded and obviously posed a risk and had really great air defense systems. So it was a lot easier to take out these kind of these type places that would knock out the power and eventually make the biological weapons unusable. And the estimates there are approximately 100,000. So we want to think through not just the direct kinetic effects when we're thinking about the ethics of war, but the foreseeable second, third order consequences, right? What is foreseeable and what risk must soldiers take in order to protect civilian lives? She also has a really fascinating discussion about how when the US bombs civilians, it's always already viewed as accidental, right? And so I really want you to think through and read through the way she teases this out, right? This idea that there's a difference between civilian deaths being foreseeable, right? You know that there are going to be civilians present, but the military necessity outweighs that, right? That can be considered sometimes ethical and even legal in warfare using the proportionality calculations. Versus intentional, right? Even if the US knows it can never intend to kill civilians. So that really gets into this idea of construction about us as ethical because the ways in which we kill in war. Our enemies are always those that intentionally kill civilians. And don't get me wrong, sometimes they very much do. That's exactly what we've seen in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But somehow this idea, the way in which we talk about it, is that it is always already beyond intention, right? There's a difference between making that proportionality calculation and something like your missile going astray, right? One is accidental, but we both call them accidental, right? And so that kind of language that we use when civilian deaths inevitably occur, the idea of tragedy, etc., she questions a little bit, which I think is quite helpful. One thing she talks us through is that kind of myth versus reality. And she talks about that image of the first Gulf War as being the first precision warfare. But only 8% of munitions were precision-guided munitions in that time. Also, there's that linguistic trick that GPS-guided munitions, at least at the time of writing for her, were referred to by the military as near precision because they're not quite as good as laser-guided bombs when it comes to their circular air probable. However, in kind of popular parlance, they're all called smart bombs. So you can see that even within the military, there are distinctions between types of weapons. Those of you in the military will know these things quite well. But the way in which they're talked about in the public is quite different. And so this is really powerful from her argument because this focus on precision war and the faith in technology enables rather than constrains civilian casualties in war. So this is a little bit of a controversial argument, right? Everything we've been reading, all the statements that you've been hearing is this idea that somehow we are more ethical because we kill using smart bombs and better technologies. And yet she's saying that this actually enables rather than constrains civilian casualties. So the danger of precision bombing, according to Zafis, is that it produces a particular kind of warfare as ethical and thereby legitimates and encourages war, right? What she's saying there is because we think that war is more ethical because of these technologies, it legitimates and encourages war. Right? It makes war legitimate. So this language of precision and smart technology, and as we'll see later on today, AI, is really divorced from the reality. It doesn't actually reflect the actual casualty and damage outcomes from the battlefield, right? So it gets you focused on the process of war or the means of war rather than the ends or the kind of empirical outcomes. So everything you're learning about focusing on AI, drones, smart bombs, gets you to focus on the technology itself, which, I mean, honestly, some of it's really cool, right? It's really fascinating. It's really incredible. What we're able to do is honestly feels like a miracle at times. But focusing on that rather than what actually happens from war is a really dangerous thing to do. So I'm going to take us through a little bit here, some of the technologies that we see in Army of None, and especially looking at the Patriot missile system and the Aegis system. So here's a good little piece on the Patriot missile system in Ukraine.
This is the US-made Patriot air defense system. Since 2 were delivered to Ukraine in April, it's proving to be an indispensable tool in Kyiv's arsenal. That's because the system is defending Ukraine's ground troops, cities, and critical infrastructure amid a barrage of Russian attacks. So why does the Patriot have an advantage over other air defense systems? Let's break it down. At the start of the war, Ukraine relied on a stockpile of Soviet-era defense systems. Those weapons can target slower-moving aerial targets, such as drones and cruise missiles. But they've struggled to combat faster-moving ballistic missiles. Now, Patriot systems are helping Ukrainian forces to intercept those projectiles. That's according to a Ukrainian air defense commander interviewed by the Wall Street Journal.
Зараз для нас ця загроза частково зникла, виходячи із кількості зенітно-ракетних комплексів «Петріот».
Here's how it works. Patriot missiles consist of multiple components. 3 of its main parts sit on top of truck platforms. The radar tracks missiles and other targets. It can detect aircraft up to 62 miles away and ballistic missiles more than 100 miles away. It sends data to the engagement control station. That unit then processes the information before sending it to the launching station, which can carry up to 16 missiles.
«Петріота» передбачені технічні можливості знищення балістичних цілей, тобто його своєчасно виявлення, перехоплення. Цілі, які летять по балістичній траєкторії, вони піднімаються на декілька десятків кілометрів і потім так же різко спускаються.
Military analysts say the system has outperformed initial expectations in Ukraine.
Хто не розумів, що «Петріот» здатний знищувати гіперзвукову ракету Х-47. Це довели українці.
Also known as the Kinzhal, the Kh-47 is one of Russia's most advanced weapons. On May 16th, a Patriot detected 6 Russian Kinzhal ballistic missiles at a distance of around 125 miles. The system launched interceptors, destroying all of them. Patriots in Ukraine fire at targets using 2 different types of interceptors, PAC-2 and PAC-3. PAC-2 downs targets through blast fragmentation, and PAC-3 uses hit-to-kill technology instead. By combining the Patriot with other air defense systems, Ukraine is now fending off most aerial threats against Kyiv. However, the Patriot does have some disadvantages. It's by far the most expensive single weapon system that the US has supplied to Ukraine. Each Patriot system costs around $1 billion and takes 2 years to build. The missiles fired out of the Patriot are expensive too. Each PAC-3 costs around $4.1 million. The high cost per missile and the relatively small number of missiles in a battery means that Patriot operators cannot shoot at every target. In addition, the Patriot requires a lot of manpower. The systems need as many as 90 soldiers to operate, but the control station can be operated in the field by as few as 3. Gaining more batteries could help Kyiv in a number of ways amid the counteroffensive, namely being able to protect ground troops from aerial threats as they push to retake territory. This summer, the US announced a new military package worth up to $500 million. The aid will include ammunition for Patriot systems, according to a statement from the Pentagon. There are at least 2 full Patriot systems operating in Ukraine. In July, Germany announced...
Obviously, this one is a little bit dated, but I think it does a really good job of showing you kind of how the Patriot system works. So now another important system that is relied upon and talked quite a bit about in your book, Army of None, is the Aegis system.
Once, battles were waged face-to-face. But to defend against today's attacks, you need to reach farther, go faster, and be more accurate than ever before. Today, our premier defense is called Aegis. The Aegis combat system protects today's frontline defenders. Aegis combats ballistic missile strikes. It protects surface vessels from sophisticated attacks and engages multiple enemy targets with pinpoint precision. From under the sea to the upper reaches of the atmosphere, simultaneously. Aegis is so powerful and so reliable that it's become America's shield and an international shield of defense for our allies. Aegis truly is rocket science at sea, and it represents cutting-edge ship defense technology. Aegis also uses its integrated components to eliminate a variety of threats at different ranges. It can provide critical battlefield intelligence in nanoseconds, and it's accurate enough to destroy an enemy missile through the vastness of space. It's like hitting a bullet with a bullet. The Aegis system can be adapted for nearly any ship, and we're even putting them on land. Year after year, Aegis keeps getting better. The system is designed to welcome new technologies for more range, more accuracy, and more advanced networking. Aegis is deployed now, worldwide, protecting our sailors, our citizens, and our partner countries around the world. An Aegis family who can share data and work together to defend us all. In today's world, the best offense is a great defense. Aegis, capable, proven, deployed.
Okay, so that was a great promo video from Lockheed Martin, but I really want you to focus in on the Aegis combat system and especially different levels of autonomy in it. So this is specifically in Army of None on page 163, and it talks about the 4 different settings of autonomy in the Aegis system. And I think it's really fascinating to compare and contrast this a little bit with the Patriot system, where the Patriot system is largely intended to replace the warfighter. The Aegis system, the automation there is used to capture the warfighter's decision making. So a kind of big difference here. But we've got to talk a little bit about normal accidents theory. So what is normal accidents theory? I want you to dig through, kind of understand that, and what lessons can we learn from that about examples of autonomy in war, specifically when it comes to nuclear weapons, right? Anytime you have systems that are highly technical and highly coupled, you're going to have accidents. That is an inevitability. And so we're going to take you through a few of the examples here, especially the 1988 USS Vincennes accident, in which U.S. naval ship took out an Iranian civilian airliner accidentally.
It was a tragedy. We did shoot down an airliner. One of those things I'm still in disbelief that it could have happened. The mood in the Gulf was very tense. Iran, Iraq were in the middle of a war at the time, and the U.S. Navy was protecting the oil tankers that came out of Kuwait to make sure the flow of oil kept coming to the United States. And the Iranians were harassing those ships, the bog-hammer speedboats that the Iranians were using. They would round robin the ships while they're shooting it, trying to catch it on fire. So our job was just kind of like a police force, if you will.
You come back this way, see there's water.
The team I was with was Combat Camera Group. I'm videotaping the whole time. And I caught a ride with the USS Vincennes, an Aegis cruiser. It's a $1 billion boat, state-of-the-art at the time. As we were sailing back to Bahrain, we got into battle with Iranian speedboats.
General quarters, all hands man your battle stations.
During a gunboat battle, we were thinking that they're going to come at us with whatever they have now, and that would have been their Air Force. The year before, in 1987, the USS Stark got hit by an Exocet missile that was launched by Iraq. We were always reminded, just remember the Stark, remember the Stark. Meaning, keep your guard up, because you might get killed. That was always in the back of your mind. And about 5 minutes went by, and they said there was a target that had left Bandar Abbas, the Iranian airfield. And their military airport and their civilian airport, to my knowledge, is the same place. So the aircraft, when it took off, was identified as air hostile. They thought it was the Iranian Air Force F-14 Tomcat, but the plane in reality was Flight 655. It was an airliner, an Airbus.
5 times a week, there's a scheduled service from Bandar Abbas across the strait to Dubai. They travel flight path Amber 59.
But here the crew is, waiting for another target to come at them, and the aircraft takes off. And I believe that one of the lieutenants, I went up and asked him, I said, what are we doing? He goes, you're going to see some missile action. And I went to the operations specialist who was watching the scope, and he's watching the missiles because he can track it off the radar, and then he sees it hit the target.
We had it, God, it was dead on.
But they found out like 15, 20 minutes later that there was an airliner missing.
An Iranian Airbus is presumed crashed. Please look for survivors or aircraft wreckage.
And so that's when it was like, what? Airliner missing? We didn't shoot an airliner, we shot a Tomcat, I thought. There was a lot of soul searching, disbelief. That's not supposed to happen. That's not what we were here to do. 290 civilians passed away on Flight 655, and of those 290, 66 were children. Felt so bad for the families that lost their loved ones, and sometimes you're part of history and you love it, and sometimes you're part of history and you hate it. This is just one of those things where I just wish it didn't happen, but I was there.
So you can see there the ways in which autonomy, context, and all of these misperceptions can take place, right? Even when you have state-of-the-art technology as the Aegis system was in 1988. It's not just human error, it's a combination of human and machine interaction. So one other case that I think highlights the complexities of human-computer interaction is Air France crash Flight 447. It was in 2009 from Brazil to France. And essentially, this is a fly-by-wire system on the A330 that prioritizes computer control. And what happened was the pitot tubes, which are underneath, were frozen. So the pilots weren't getting airspeed readings, which normally isn't necessarily a problem. But one of the pilots was mistakenly pulling back on the side yoke and got them into such a high pitch that alarm bells were going off like crazy. And it sounds a little bit strange, but if you're in a stall, the best thing to do is to point the nose down, get lift underneath the wings, and go back up. But all these alarms are just going off constantly at these pilots. So here's an example.
Stall, stall. Stall, stall. Stall, stall.
So that's what the pilots are hearing over and over, and they can't quite figure out what's going on. And so the pilot was pitched up so high, 41 degrees, that the computer on the A330 thought it was a malfunction, right? The computer thought it was too high of a pitch and it was malfunctioning. So when the pilot started doing the correct thing, which is to pitch the nose down again, it came back within range for what the computer thought was possible. And then all the alarms started going off again, right? So when you're so high, the computer thinks you're malfunctioning, you do what you're supposed to be doing, and then all the alarms start to go off again. So you can see how this human-computer interaction really led to another tragedy, because it's not just about what the technology can do, it's about what assumptions go into that technology. And speaking of assumptions, I think it's a good reminder to think about kind of real-world examples, right? So if you look at the flash crash in 2012, 460 million was lost in 45 minutes. I guess that seems pretty tame today when trillions can go away in the stock market. But there was no kill switch. There was this kind of algorithm malfunction. And what's interesting is that at the time, this chief financial officer of Goldman Sachs said, according to their algorithms, the things that were happening were 5 standard deviations from what they expected to happen. So those of you that know statistics know that 5 standard deviations is astronomically impossible. It's the equivalent of winning the Powerball lottery multiple times in a row. But the point is, no matter how good your algorithm is, if the fundamental assumptions fall out, that can lead to a lot of issues. So something we don't have time to go into a lot is the Stuxnet virus. Really, really fascinating. Believed to be, though never admitted, U.S. and Israeli joint operation to infect Iranian centrifuges for uranium enrichment. Back in 2007, it was the first case of offensive cyber use in the world. And there's a really great, if you have HBO Max streaming, it's called The Perfect Weapon. It's a great documentary that looks at this kind of early cyber warfare, how the Iranians responded, and then some other interesting cases as well, Russian interference, North Korean hacking of Sony Pictures, etc. So worth a look. I know Paul Shar talks about it in Your Army of None, but just wanted to throw that out there to recommend. U.S. policies and guidance. I think there's a really good, and everything I've heard both personally and read about Bob Work, Deputy Secretary of Defense in Obama and the first Trump administration. Really, he's one of those that doesn't necessarily believe the AI hype. He believes in human-machine collaboration, checks and balances, a battle network, and he's someone who really thinks deeply about these issues. He wrestles with the challenges, the risks, understanding normal accidents theory while also the benefits of autonomous systems, and really believes that the laws of war submit to persons and not systems, right? So kind of all the dilemmas that we're talking about, he's someone that's been thinking quite deeply about these issues. And although I haven't met him personally, I've worked very closely with people that have, and they have nothing but great things to say. So there are a number of individuals that are thinking deeply about this, and I think any caricatures are misguided at this point. So I do want to say just a quick, when we talk about artificial general intelligence, you're going to be talking about AI next week, just 2 more movie plugs, Ex Machina and Her, 2 really dark movies about the Turing test, or the idea that you may not be able to, if AI can get to the point where you can't recognize that it's AI, we've reached an interesting state. So I did a little bit of work with one of my French colleagues from the Ministry of Defense looking at human-machine integration. And I really wanted to, this was a really great quote that kind of launched a research agenda for he and I, from the French Deputy Minister of Defense for the Army, Florence Parly. She said that France, quote, "we are committed to the development of Iron Man, not Spider-Man." So what she was saying is that we're committed as the French government to developing soldier enhancements through exoskeletons and different types of things that look a lot more like Iron Man, but not Spider-Man. They're not into genetic engineering of soldiers. Biological, pharmacological engineering was not something that they wanted to explore for soldier enhancements. Of course, other countries are exploring that. This was just a headline that I wanted to talk about human-machine integration. This idea of humans and machines telepathically communicating with swarm drones is quite terrifying. So getting now into a little bit more of Army of None, swarm drones kind of changed the game in a very powerful way. We haven't seen them on the battlefield too intensely. We've seen a lot of FPV drones in Russia, Ukraine, but this was an exercise that took place a few years back in the U.S. that I think is quite interesting.
These U.S. fighter jets are releasing a swarm of micro drones.
Mark release.
They're called Perdix micro drones, and they were originally developed at the MIT Lincoln Lab. They're meant for intelligence, surveillance, and recon. 103 3D printed drones were deployed from FA-18 Super Hornets in October. This is what the swarm sounded like. The drones were given missions, and the swarm was able to perform collective decision-making and fly in formation. It was the largest swarm ever tested by the Department of Defense. Perdix aren't weaponized, but the US isn't ruling out attack swarms for the future.
Right, so swarm drones that Paul Scharre talks about are really kind of important for the battlefield of the future, thinking about collective decision making that goes in at the programming level, not actually at the decision maker level, where humans are completely out of the loop, so to speak. You have full autonomy. What does that mean for war? How do you program in ethics? And what does it mean when they start to make a mistake, right? 1 million mistakes a second is what Paul Scharre talks about in a foreign policy article he wrote a number of years back. And what did those mistakes look like? So a couple of interesting cases that I wanted to share with you. So when OpenAI was first looking at programming self-driving cars a number of years back, they did it on these kind of 1980s style games. All right, it seems kind of silly, but you would train the AI on these 1980s style racing games to collect as many coins as possible. Right, but some things that AI does sometimes is called reward hacking. Now, what does reward hacking means? It means that the AI started to learn so quickly that the best way to collect the most coins possible is to keep crashing and never finish the race. If you never finish the race, then you will get endless coins, right? So the fundamental assumption of the programmers was that the car would always want to finish the race, but AI realized that in order to maximize coins, it should never finish. It should always crash, right? So this is a way in which AI can reward hack in kind of like a comedic way, but it just goes to show the ways in which the things that you might think will be obvious as a programmer may not seem so to AI because it will make the best decisions based on the parameters that you have given it. So this is really troubling when you start thinking about what might happen on a complex battlefield. So back in December 2016, AlphaGo from Google DeepMind beat Lee Sedol in the game of Go in Move 37. So Move 37 of the third game, Lee Sedol was defeated in the game of Go. And this was kind of the aha moment, especially for China as well, when they started to deeply invest in artificial intelligence, right? The most complex game ever. And the way in which AlphaGo learned how to play Go was through machine learning. Basically, the way you can think of machine learning, at least in this context, is that AlphaGo, this computer, played millions of iterations of Go against itself to learn the best possible moves. Now, what's interesting about Move 37 is that it was so unexpected. It's no move that a human would have ever made, that they genuinely thought the machine had malfunctioned. It made no sense. And then it actually turned out to be the winning move. But it was so unprecedented that it was this idea that AlphaGo had beat the human, right? Both in thinking outside the box that no human would ever think of. Right. And so one thing that in circles that I've worked with, especially with AI and military systems, what those of us are most afraid of is a Move 37 in military AI systems. That's exactly what we call it, is you deploy a military AI system and it does something that might be within its parameters that you did not expect, and how that can lead to escalation spirals, right? So for example, just you have a drone that is programmed to shoot down Chinese fighter jets if threatened, and it accidentally shoots one down without your knowledge over the Taiwan Strait, and you start to get into an escalation spiral because China is not going to believe you that it was an accident, that it wasn't intentional, and you can see how it quickly goes out of hand. right? So even something within its parameters, making a decision without human involvement can be quite dangerous. You also get a lot of errors in AI and adversarial. So MIT Tech Review noted that the top 10 visual data sets were riddled with labeling errors. A mushroom was labeled a spoon, a frog labeled a cat, a high note from Ariana Grande was labeled a whistle. And looking at ImageNet data set, it has an estimated error rate of 5.8%. QuickDraw, a compilation of hand drawings, has an estimated error rate of 10%. Google AI, you can see here, it actually thinks this turtle is a rifle and this is a magpie, right? So even though we have this idea that AI is getting really good, it's quite bad in a lot of ways. And so, it's kind of funny when AI thinks this turtle is a rifle, but when it's in military decision making in high complex environment, a 10% error rate is like really dangerous. Even a 5% error rate or a 1% error rate can be quite dangerous. Also, you have adversarial AI. This is just a better image of the turtle and the rifle. But this is actually very interesting. Some researchers at MIT were able to trick with these types of little things that just look like little graffiti on here or love stops hate, etc. They were actually able to trick some self-driving cars to believe that this was a 55 mile per hour sign instead of a stop sign. So really, really scary what you're able to do with a little bit of knowledge. Again, your enemy has a say as well, something we always want to forget. So this super soldiers, future of AI, that's what you're going to be focusing on a little bit next week. So a few conclusions I want to leave you with before we wrap up for this week. I think there's a bit of a false promise of technology and AI solving the dilemmas of war. The ethical political dilemmas, as you saw in Maya Zafis's piece, as well as AI being this game changer, right? There's a real complexity that I think Paul Shar and I both demonstrated on how humans and machines interact in this interesting psychology of decision making, and normal accidents theory really comes into play as well. I think the game-changing nature of AI is an illusion. I think it can help in a lot of ways, but I think you should have a healthy skepticism for it. There's a real lot of kind of snake oil salesman elements going on here that I think, while it can be useful, we haven't seen demonstrated yet. Nuclear weapons are always in the background of conflict, right? We talk about these interesting technologies. How does that look as you think about integrating more AI or technology into nuclear weapons targeting, nuclear weapons delivery systems? If you want to look a number of years back in War on the Rocks, if you don't read War on the Rocks, you absolutely should. It's great pieces written for a more general policy audience. Had a debate about the dead hand or the doomsday machine, about whether or not to integrate AI in U.S. Nuclear weapon systems. So really fascinating debate that really stirred the pot. I think in the end, we have a necessity to think deeply about the morality and the utility of war, and not just focus on the means of war, but also the ends of war. What are the political objectives you're trying to achieve? Technology plays a central role in international politics, I think now more than ever. But I hope you come away a little bit of a techno-pessimist from this, because autonomy is important in war, but I think there are different levels of it, as the Patriot system and the Aegis system both demonstrate for you. What it means for the ethics and laws of war remains to be seen, but I hope that this conversation today has stirred your mind a little bit for what the possibilities will be. Thank you so much. I look forward to reading your discussion on this week.